Hey all, welcome to today's class. We are going to look at some few things here. Let me share the screen so that we can be able to see. So today we are going to look at what we call SQL, and SQL stands for Structured Query Language. And we are going to look at the practical part of it. So there are some few things that we need to look at. One is, why do we need to use SQL? And the first reason as to why we use SQL is SQL allows users to access data in a relational database management system. The other second thing is that users can describe the data. The other thing is that users to define the data in a database and manipulate that data. The other thing is that it allows users to embed within other languages using SQL modules, libraries, and precompilers. The other reason is that it allows users to create and drop databases, and we are going to look at some of those things. The other reason is because it allows users to create views, stored procedures, functions in a database. Then we have it allows users to perform or to set permissions, on tables and procedures and views. So the first thing to do when and I've shared my SQL console for the purpose of practical part of it. The first thing to do when you get to SQL console is to show databases, and I'm going to write this one, databases. The first, also you should note that we always terminate using a semicolon, and again SQL is case insensitive, so you can either use the capital letters or the small letters. So after that, then you press enter. Now the database that exists in my SQL console, in this one we have information, schema, Charles, confusion, Elizabeth, MySQL, Thika School. So I'm going to create a database. So you write again the statement, create database, and we can give it a name. Let's give it online underscore class. Then we put a semicolon again to terminate this statement. Then we press enter. Now you can see from this occupation you have query okay, one row affected at some few seconds before. Then we can show those. We show the databases now. Database again, I've said we terminate using a semicolon. You notice that I have my SQL console. That is, I have created in my SQL console, I've created online class, which is here. Then after that, we choose and we use this statement, we choose the database to work on, and I now write use online underscore class, then a semicolon to terminate. It will tell you database changed. In other words, it changes the database, and it will choose the database that you want to work on now. Now, if you write a statement to show tables in that database, you'll find that table is empty or it doesn't have tables. So I'm going to take you through the procedures of creating a table, and I'm going to share some things here. So I will share some things also here to show you the syntax of creating a table. So just a minute so that I share some content here. We see the syntax of creating a table. We are going to create a lot of tables today. We delete some, we drop some. That's what you're going to do in this class. So the syntax of creating a table, also there's a lot of theory that I'm going to assume, because I expect that you're going to look at those things in a later class. So I should start with creating a table or dropping a table. Before actually I create a table, I should also tell you I should show you, for instance, like now, if I want to drop a table, let's say I've created a table and I realize that I did not create that table in the right way, I can drop that table. Dropping means we are deleting. So I come and write that statement here. I can drop that database, drop database. For drop database online underscore class, then a semicolon. We press enter, then we show databases, and a comma. You notice that in this time we don't have an online database by the name online class. So let me create another database. I've said that we create database. Now. I'll give it SQL underscore online underscore class. The reason why I'm using underscore is because SQL will not permit us to create different names. So when I use underscore, it appear as one. Then I press enter. You can see from my console that now I have one query okay, one row affected at 2 seconds. Then I can show databases so that we see what I have created. And you can see from this console, I have SQL online class. So I'm going to show you how to create a table. But before we create a table, there's some few things that we need to know. There is what we call data types. Data types is I'm going to show you how to define a data type. So the statement for creating a table, let's say for instance, I want to create a table for, in this class, maybe I want to create a table for staffs, I want to create a table for student, and I want to create a table for, let's deal with parents. So I will create, what am I creating? I'm creating a table. Now, which table? The table's name now, let me call it student underscore details, or let me call it student. Then I open the brace. Now inside here, we are going to have the fields. We call them fields, but I will look at the theory later. I think it will be more important. So when we create a table by the name student, then in it we create fields, and the first field we can give it student underscore name. Then we give it the data type, we call it varchar. Into bracket, the varchar, we define the characters that we want to have. Then we put a comma to terminate that, to add that field. Then we can have student underscore contact. And again, contact is an integer. We put int, we don't put the characters. We don't put the braces on the int. After that, we can have location. For location, we can use varchar because it can be Nairobi, it can be any other place. So varchar, then we have characters, like let me use 30. And the characters is the number of the characters that, when you talk about characters, we call them in English, we call them characters in English is like the letters. So the characters that this field will be carrying. So far I have a field for student name, I have a field for student contact, and I have a field for location. And finally, I can have this field. I can give age. You can have age. The age, then it is an int. Then I put the brace, a comma, a semicolon, then I press enter. It gives me an error, create a table, student. Then we have, oh yeah, I'm sorry. We should have chosen the database. So we use online, that is, we use SQL underscore online class. Sorry for that mistake. We use SQL underscore online class. Then we put a semicolon, press enter. Then after that, now that's when we shall have to create a table called student. Then in the student, we are going to capture the student name. We are going to capture the student contact. We are going to capture the location of the student, and are going to capture the age. Then we press enter. You notice that query okay, 0 row affected. Then you have at what record. Then we can show tables in that database so that we see if our table is there. When you show tables, you'll see we have one table now called student. So I'll create another table using the same statement, create table. Now I can call it staff. Then the staff can have staff's name, staff underscore name. And I say the reason as I'm using underscore is to make my two name appear like two. But if I put two names separately without the underscore, to give me an error. So then I have varchar int bracket. I can choose the character to have 26 and a comma. Then I can have contact for the staff, which is an integer. Then I can have department of that staff. Then I can give it varchar. Then I put a brace there to give the character like 30. Then I put that one. Finally, I can have another one here. We can have age, and age is an integer. Then you put a brace and a semicolon. I say the semicolon is to terminate our statement. So to terminate our SQL statement, let me enlarge this one so that at least it will be bigger. Thank you. Then we press enter. Now, if we show tables again, we will have, you'll see now we have a table called staff and we have a table called student. Now, the next thing to do, it is to describe. We can describe our table. We describe staff and then a semicolon so that we see the kind of field that we use. And you remember we had on this part when we are creating a table called staffs, we created a field on the name, we create a field on contact, we create a field on department, and then we had age. So when we describe it, it gives us the data type that we use and its character. It gives us, when we talk about null, key, and default, this one we call them constraints, and constraints are the rules that must be followed when but I'm going to look at them. The constraints are the rules that must be enforced when you are creating a database or when you are working in a database. And in this case, it is SQL to be specific. So you notice that in our fields, we create a field on staff's name, we create a field on contact, we create a field on department, and we have a field on age. And their data type were varchar, int. Then we have null. So the next table that I'm going to create, I'm going to implement some constraints. Let me create, I said I'm going to create that. Let me create the table for administrator. So create table administrator. So on the administrators, you can have their name. You can have, to differentiate, to have AND underscore name to stand for administrator name, which is varchar. And then we have the characters to be 20. Then we put a comma. We can have their, not the year, sorry, we can have contact again, contact, which is an integer. Then integer, I said we don't put the characters. Then we can have another, I'm thinking about the field to use. We can have the ID of this person, which is an integer. Then you put a comma. Then you're going to put primary key for the ID. And then we can have on the part here, when we have the contact, we can make it not null. When we talk about not null, is to ensure that it will not be empty. When we talk about null, there is a difference between null and zero. So for null is when the field is empty. So you can notice that I have implemented the not null constraint, and I've also implemented the primary key for the ID. Those are the constraints that I was talking about. Then finally, I close with the brace. I close with another brace because I'd opened the brace here. Then I have opened the ID. For the ID, then I put a semicolon to terminate my statement. Then now I can show tables. You'll notice that we have so far now 3 tables. Show tables, sorry. Then I put a semicolon. So you notice that we have administrators, we have the table for staffs, and we have the table for student. So we can describe administrator. We can describe administrator and a semicolon, administrator. Then you notice that now the difference between this database for that I described before for staffs and the administrator, you notice that on the administrator we have implemented not null. When it tells you that a contact should not be null, and that's why it is no. If you try to, when you are inserting the values and you make the contact to be empty, it will gives you an error. Then you can see that we have the primary key here. The primary key, it is to make sure that when you talk about the primary key, the definition of primary key is it is to uniquely identify a field in a data in a field. So they uniquely identify the data in a table. Then after that, we'll get to see the difference between all the constraints. I'm going to implement one at a time. So currently I will insert the values on those 3 tables. So the syntax, the statement for inserting the values are like that. We have insert into the table's name. I start with the first thing to do. So when you're inserting the values, it's good to describe each table. So we can describe each table to see the field and their data type, describe stuff, and then a semicolon, we press enter. Then we describe student, then a semicolon again, we press enter, and finally you describe administrator. We describe administrator, which we had described before. There is no need of describing again. We have them here now. We have described administrator here. We have described the staffs, and we have described the student. So I start with inserting the values in on the administrator. So we'll have insert into the table's name now is administrator. The table name is administrator. And what are we inserting? We're inserting values. Then we open the bracket. When you're inserting the values for varchar, we quote them. Let's say we have, let's say we insert Taichikas. We have quoted it. Then we put a semicolon, we put a comma. Then we are also going to insert the contact. The contact, because in an integer we don't quote 07. I'm just going to insert randomly. Then we put a comma again. Then we put the ID. Again, I'm going to insert the ID randomly. Then you close the bracket that we put a semicolon and press enter. You notice that we have the query is okay, and then we have one row affected in that second. So then we can still insert the values again. We can insert another value using the same syntax. Again, as I said, I'm going to use randomly. Then we can change this name to be James Owango, or whichever name. I'm just giving a random name or it. Then you press enter. One row affected. We can as well insert into again. Insert into administrator. Then we are inserting values. Then you open the bracket, insert into administrator. Administrator have I in my when I was creating the table. So if I try to insert that way, it will give me an error, because when I was creating the table, I created it with an I. Then the values, again, we start with the name. We quote because it's a varchar. We can have Ibrahim, Ibrahim Abdi, and we close the quotation, then a comma, then the contact again, the ID, which should be like that because it's an integer. Then you put a semicolon and press enter. So we have inserted three values. We have inserted three rows in this table called administrator. So for you to get the values that you have inserted in a table, you use a statement called select asterisk. When you use asterisk is to output all the values. Every time you will be using asterisk is to output all the values. Then we write from a table called administrator, then we put a semicolon, then we press enter. You notice that we inserted a value called Taichikas or Roe, and that contact, we inserted them when we are inserting here. Then insert James Owani, the same here. Then insert Ibrahim Abdi, the same. So I'm going to continue inserting values because I will use them later somewhere. So insert into, now I'll work on student. Let me deal with the next table called staff. I'm going to insert values in staff. Insert into staff. What are we inserting? We're inserting values. Which values? The first value that you are supposed to insert is the staff's name, then the contact, the department, then age. And you notice that for the staff's name should be Vachal. Then for the contact should be int. Then for department should be Vachal. Then for the age should be continue with this one. Sorry, there's a problem here with my share. Let me continue sharing the screen. Sorry for that mistake. It's called internet problem. So we insert the name again. Let me have Paul Tumbo. Then we put a comma. The other name, the other thing that we need to insert is the contact. I'm going to insert randomly. Then a comma. The other thing that you're supposed to insert is the department, and I will give it maybe IT. Then again we double quote that. Then we put a comma because it was of a child. Then the age, I can give Paul the age of 36 years. He is very old. Then we put a bracket there. Then we put a semicolon. We press enter. You will notice that one row affected. Then I can continue inserting values now. Can I have another name here? Just randomly name. Then can I have Ellie or whichever name. Then the contact, I try to change it. Let me use that one. The department as well. Can I have department, let's say human resource. Then the age, I can give this 26. Then I press enter. So you will notice that we have inserted two values in that. So we can select asterisks. I've said that when we are using asterisks is to output all the values. Every time we use asterisk from a table called staff. Then we put a semicolon. Press enter. We have inserted these two names. We have inserted Mr. Paul Tumbo. We have inserted Ellie Jane. So if for instance you want to output the, let's say, let's go back to, let me output here because so that I at least I have a clean work. Select asterisk from administrator. Then I output that. For instance, I want to output only the name, so I will have select this time. What do I want to select? I want to select AD, and I use AD for administration. So I have administrator name, from which table? From a table called administrator. So let's see what we'll have here. from a table called administrator, then a semicolon, we press enter. We have only outputted the values on this column called administrator's name. And also we can as well select the values, select statement. We defined it under DML, that is data manipulation language. So when we select, I said earlier, it is to output the values. So I'm going to select the values. Now I'm going to select contact. Contact from which table? From a table called administrator. Administrator, I said when I was creating this, I created it administrator using the eyes, then I put a semicolon, press enter. So I have outputted the column of contact only. Let's say for instance, I want to output the values of James only. James only in the table called administrator. So I'm going to select, as I have said earlier, I'm going to select asterisk, not asterisk. I'm going to select, I need the name James Owani. So I'm going to select AD underscore name from a table called administrator. And now I give a condition, and when we are given the condition, we use a where statement where. Now you will notice that the ID for, I can use either, I can give the administrator, I can give the condition on the administrator's name, on the contact, or on the ID. But this time I want to choose to use ID where ID equals the ID for James is 66757532, then a semicolon, I press enter. I have outputted the values of James Owani. Now, the reason as I have decided to look at that is because at one time you'll encounter a database with so many names or so many data to output, and you want specific value. So you as well can use the select statement to do that. Then let's say we want to change the values, the ID, we want to change the ID name of James Owani. I need to select it here so that at least we move together. Select asterisk from administrator, then a semicolon, we press enter. I want to add to change the values of the ID name, the ID for James, or let me deal with Abraham Abdi. So there are some statements that we are going to look at, but currently I need to find to come up to where we are from where we have started, so that at least we move together. So the first thing I've said, when you get to an SQL console, it is to show databases. So the first statement that you need to do, like for instance, you get to a new company and you have been given the database to work on, you need to show databases. So at least you know the database that you are working on. Then you choose the database to work on, and that's why I'm using use SQL online class underscore online underscore class. Then I put a semicolon, I press, we use the somewhere missed on the spelling of online. We use online underscore, we use SQL online, SQL underscore online underscore class. Then a semicolon to terminate that, we press enter, and it will tell you that the database have changed. Then from that database, you can show the tables that you are working on, show tables. Then you will see in that table in that database, we have those tables. We have a table on an administrator, we have a table on staff, and we have a table on student. Then after that, you can select the values if you wish. That is select asterisk, and I've said select asterisk is to output all the value. from a table called administrator, then a semicolon, you press enter. Those are the values that were inserted there. You encounter, this is an introduction. You'll find that when you be dealing with real values, you might be dealing with so many values. Then again, we select asterisk. Again, from we had inputted some value on staff. We select asterisk from staff, then we put a semicolon, we press enter. Those are the values that we had inserted on the administrator and also on the staffs. So we can create another table. I'm just trying to avoid going so deep because I intended this to be an introduction class. We can create a table. I said for the constraints, we can create a table implementing the constraints again. Now I'll create a table called customer. So create a table. I need to first implement the constraints. Create table customer. The customer should have the following fields. Should have the field of the name, the ID, the age, the address, and the salary. So I can have name, and again I said it's a virtual to have 45 characters, then a semicolon. Then I can have the ID, which is an integer. An integer we don't specify, but if you wish you can. Then we can have age, and the age again I want it to be integer. Then I can have address. I can use char, which is also another type. We can have like 46 if you wish, 46, then a comma. And finally I can have salary. Which should be decimals, and then now we specify the decimals. We can have a salary of 18 character and two decimal places. Now initially when we started creating a table, you would have created such a table without implementing any constraints. But in our case, I want us to implement a constraints. And the first one, I want to implement the not null, because there are those columns that you will require them not to be null. And I said earlier that not to be null is not to be empty. So the first column that should not be null is the ID in my case. So I will have ID not null. Then age as well should not be null, not null. Then the address again should be not null. Sorry, should be not null. We can as well implement on the ID. It's okay, but the contact, I can add a column here called contact. We can add a column here, we call it contact, a semicolon there. We can have contact, and I'll tell you why I have decided to have contact. And the data type for the contact to be int, then to be unique, then should be not null. We'll see what will happen. Then I can have primary key. In my case, primary key to be the ID to be the primary key, because everybody should have a different ID. Then I put the bracket, a semicolon, and press enter. I have an error here, and I think it's on the spelling of the unique. Create table customer, name virtual 45, ID int not null, age int not null, address char not null, then salary decimal, and then contact unique. Let me first delete on the contact part as I confirm something on it. Then I will check later. Primary key, so that I get where the problem is. Then I press enter. Syntax, check the menu for. There's an error. Create table customer, name virtual, ID int and not null, Then age int not null, address child. Thank you. The mistake was not on the it was on child because child should have the character number, so it should be 20. Sorry for that mistake. I press enter. Oh, sorry. Create table, not null, decimal address, primary key, salary, okay, and the ID. Let me undo this. We create another table. Sorry for that. So create table customer, name of a child, and have that one. Then after that we can have we can have age. Let me repeat that again. Age to be int and also to be not null. Then I put a comma. I can have address double D, and then I can give it a child. In this case, let me give it 25. Then I can have a comma there. I can have ID, and if I was to create this table, ID to be int, and as well to be not null, not to be empty, not null than a comma. Then after that I can have salary, and salary should be decimal, and decimal I've said I am going to specify it in character, and 2. Then I put the bracket there, and I put a comma, implement primary key. We call it primary key ID. I hope I have ID here. Yes, I have ID. Then I put the bracket. I close the bracket there. Yeah, we have query okay now. So it is that I made mistakes. Then now let's show databases. Let's show tables first. Show tables and a semicolon. We have a table on customer. We can describe customer. Put a semicolon. Yeah. So we have a table on customer that have the name, have the age, and we have the address, we have the ID, and we have the salary. So we can insert values in that table, insert into a table called customer. And what we are inserting is values. We are inserting values. We open the bracket. The first value is of a child. Again, we can have any name. Alfred something, Kiru. And then we put a comma there. Then we can have age. I don't quote int because it's an integer. Then I can have the address. I quote address because it's a child. Anything to do with child, the child we quote. Then a comma. I space if I wish. Then I can have the ID 67. Then a comma. I'm just using randomly ID randomly. Then a comma. Then I can have salary. Let's use such a salary. Let me have 50,000. Then I put the bracket and then the semicolon. I can try insert other values. Yeah, 56. I can change this one to a different one. Can I have Eldoret, LD. Then I can have the age to be 56. I can have the name to be Marcy. Cherono. Then I press enter. So far I've inserted two values. I can output them. by select asterisk from customer. Then I put a semicolon and press enter. So I have those values. That is for the Alfred Keely. Then I have for Mercy Cherono, and I have the Eldoret. Now you have noticed that I have the decimal places. When I was inserting these values, I was not having the decimal places, but now on the out portion of these values, I have the decimal places because I have defined the data type of that to be decimal. Now, the next thing that I need to look at, I've said we can use where clause statement to output a specific value, and I need to repeat. So we can select asterisk. Let's say, for instance, I want to select the column for Alfred Keely, the row that's only the row for Alfred Keely only. So I'm going to select asterisk from the table called customer. We have customer. And on this customer, we give a condition so that we specify the values that we want. So where, let me use age because I think Alfred has 45, where age equals 45. Then I put a semicolon, terminate my statement, then I press enter. I've outputted specifically the values, the row of Alfred. Then I stayed again, I can output a specific value on I can output the column of ID, the column of salary. So I select asterisk, not asterisk, this time I'm specific. I select the column called salary. I can even select two. I can select salary and address, no, and name. And then from which table? From a table called customer. From a table called customer, then a semicolon. I've outputted specifically the column of salary and name. And you notice that I've outputted them according to how I have arranged them here. According to how I've written my statement, that's how they come out. So I'm going to look at something else here very fast, very fast. I'm going to look at the operators, the SQL operators, that is and or. So I'm going to insert the values again. I'm going to insert some few values on this customer table. So I'm going to insert into a table called customer. And what you are going to insert for me to, I said earlier, it is not a must that it's not a must that you master everything. You can always be describing so describe customer so that you know the fields that you created, describe customer. And you notice that we have a column, we have a field for name, we have a field for age, we have a field for address, and we have a field for ID and the salary. So now I can insert into a table called customer. And what we are inserting in customer, we are inserting values. And which are those values? We are inserting the name, and I can have Brian Musiri. Inserting Brian Musiri. I can have his age. He seems old. We can have 29 years. Then I can put a comma. Then the address, we said because it was a child, we could, let's say, Kitui. Then we can have the ID randomly, the comma. Then I can have salary. I will also insert salary randomly, 230,000. Then I close the bracket, I put a semicolon, I press enter. So if we select asterisk, for us to see the values that tumeweka, we select asterisk from a table called customer so that we see. So far we have three rows. We have Alfred, we have the row for Mercy Cherono, and we have the row for Brian. So I'm going to use two operators here. I'm going to implement the operators, the and or operator. And majorly, we are going to implement it when we are outputting the values. So we are going to select Let's say, for instance, we want to select specifically, we want to use, we have, maybe you have the values, like for instance, you want to get the people who are on a certain age, but I'm going to look deep into that in the next lesson. But today I'm only going to look at the and or. So let's say, for instance, we want to output the values of this, that is the ID being 6777 and the ID to be 897. So we can select the age. We select age, comma. We can select name, and I said earlier that the way you output your values, that's how they are going to come out. We can select the salary. Where? No, from now our table called customer. From customer. Then the condition where ID equals 67, where not ID. Yeah, it's okay. Let me use the condition where the age, I want to output the values of these values, where age equals 45 or age equals 56. Then I put a semicolon, I press enter. So now specifically I've used or, that is all operators, to output the name, that is starting with the age, the name, the salary of a customer whose age is 45 or the age is 56. Now if I change the all to be and, it will give me empty set, but I'll explain why. The reason why it is giving me an empty set, when you use the and operator and, the two condition must be met for us to output a value. For instance, now we can have, let me implement select to show you, select age, comma, name, comma, salary from customer where age equals 45 and ID equals 677. Then you put a semicolon. We get a value because the two conditions are met. We have an age of 45 and you have the ID of 67. So that's why we have outputted the value for the age 45, name Alfred, and then the salary. So far I've looked at some few things, how to show the database data in your console, how to show the tables that you have created, how to create a table itself, how to insert the values in a table, how to output the values that you insert in a table, maybe the whole lot or specific one. Then when you talk about the OR operators, I've said that all operators is used to combine the multiple conditions in SQL statement, and we use the where clause so as we specify the condition. The difference between and all is that for all, if one condition is met, one side of the condition is met, you output the values. Then for and, if one condition is not met, we don't output the values. So let's say I'm going to select all the values, select asterisk from customer, then a semicolon there. So let's say, for instance, I want to change the values, the age. I've noticed that when I was inserting, maybe I was inserting the values of a customer, and then I realized that the values that I inserted for specific customers are not correct, and I want to change that. So I want to change, let's say, for instance, the address for Alfred was not Nairobi, it was Mombasa, and I want to change that. So we use the update statement. We have update, we update customer, update customer, then we set address, to be, we set a new address to be Mombasa, then we double quote that because it is virtual, where we now specify the condition where ID equals 677, then a semicolon, then you press enter. Now, if we output the values again, you will notice that our Nairobi changed to Mombasa. Select asterisk from, you select asterisk from customer, then a semicolon. Now, instead of now Alfred being the Alfred address to be Nairobi, it is now Mombasa because you have updated the values. Now, what will happen if you don't specify? If you don't specify the condition, let's see what will happen. Let's say we scrub this condition starting from where, and we put that way. Then you press. You will notice that all the values, all the address will change to Mombasa. Select asterisk from customer, then a semicolon. All the address have changed to Mombasa because you have not specified. We have not specified the condition. We have not specified the values that we are changing, and that's why the condition where cross is very important when we are adjusting any value, when we are altering the values in a table, and we say that that is under the statement, the SQL command code DML, data manipulation language. Then I can look, so I've looked at how to, insert the values, how to update the values in case you realize that the values that you inserted were wrong. Now I want to also delete some values here, and I'm going to use a delete query. And we say delete query is used to delete the existing records from a table. Again, you use where cross with delete query, delete select to delete selected rows, or otherwise you are going to delete the whole record. So we can delete the specific value. Let's say, for instance, we want to delete, we are going to delete something here. Let me give an example. We delete, let me write delete. We delete, I want to delete the values of Brian. So delete, delete from the customer table now. Delete from customer table, that is the table name is customer. We delete from customer, where now we specify the condition where the ID, where the age equals 29. Let's see what will happen. Then we put a semicolon. Then if we output those values again, we are going to see a different thing. Select asterisk from customer, then a semicolon, we press enter. We have deleted the values of Brian. Now, what will happen if you don't specify the condition? If you don't specify the condition, let's see, what will happen is that we are going to delete all the values in that table. So we can select asterisk, it will be empty. Select asterisk from customer. Then we put a semicolon. Our set is empty because we did not specify the values that we want to delete. So I will repeat from where I've started so that at least we raise some emphasis. So the moment you get to my SQL console and you enter the password and everything, the first thing, the right thing to do, it is to show the databases, because it is not all times that you'll be the one who have worked on the database. So we show databases and we see the database that are already there. Then you choose the database to use, and we use this statement called use. Now I'm going to use SQL underscore online because that's the database we created with you, online class. Then you put a semicolon, you press enter. We have changed the database. Now we can show tables that are already in existence there. Show tables because there are many. We have a table on administrator, we have a table on customer, we have a table on staff, we have a table on student. Now we want to see the values that all the fields that we created. We describe our tables. Let me start with administrators. You describe administrators. It is administrator and a semicolon. Those are the fields that we created and their data types and their constraints. Then again, you can describe other tables to see what you created. Describe stuff, then a semicolon to terminate your statement, and you can see the fields that you created. The next thing I've talked about is to insert the values, and I will repeat. The statement, that is the statement for inserting values in a specific field. It is guided by the number of fields and the data types of those fields. Like now in the staffs, you have 4 fields. That is the fields of staff. We have the field of contact, and we have the field of department, and finally we have the age. And the data type, we have varchar, we have int, we have varchar, we have int. And I said that for varchar, when you're inserting the values, we quote because we are going to input the characters also together with char. But for integer and decimals, we don't quote the values. So we are going to insert, and what are we inserting? Or where are we inserting? We are inserting into. Now the table's name called staff. And what are we inserting? We're inserting values. Now, which are those values? The first one is the name, and I've said we quote. We can have Charles, whichever name. And then we close the quotation, we put a comma to add that field. Then you can have the contact. Contact is an integer, we don't need to quote. We put a semicolon. Then we have the department, which is also varchar, so we quote. We can have ICT. Then we can close the quotation, we put a comma. Then we have the age of this man. We have, let me say, 67. Then you close the bracket. Then you put a semicolon. You notice that the first value I inserted is the value Charles. For the staffs field, I've also inserted the values 67554 for contact. Then for department, and I've quoted because of varchar. Then I have the last value, age. Then I put a semicolon to terminate that statement. Then I press enter. The next thing that I have taught today is how to output the values. I have said is to select. If you want to output all the values, we select asterisk. Every time you encounter the asterisk anywhere, it is to output all the values. So output asterisk from staff, then a semicolon to terminate. Then we press enter, and so far we have those values. Then we still can use asterisks to output specific values by adding where cross, which is a condition for us, where we can say where department equals, we quote IT. And I said earlier that SQL is case insensitive, or again we can combine our operators, that is and or operators. Now I'm going to combine or department. Sorry for the spreading. Department equals department equals, we quote ICT. So then we put a semicolon to terminate that, we press enter. We have outputted those people that belong to the IT and those that belong to the ICT department. So then the other thing that I've looked at is to update the values, and I've said we can update to change in case you inserted the wrong value. Update, and I've talked about update customer when we are looking at the customer. So in this case, we are going to update the values on the staff. So we update staff. What are we updating? We set the department equals to, we quote the department for that, for where we want to change. We can have finance, then we close the quotation. Where we set the quotation, I've said the reason as why we use where is to avoid changing all the values to that are under the department to finance. Where now I can say where age equals 67, because I want to change the values of Charles, the department of Charles, to another department. So now if we output the values that we inserted earlier, select from asterisk, you notice that the department for Charles has changed from ICT to finance. Now there's a value that we had created where we had let me describe, then I explain what I mean. Describe customer, then a semicolon, we put an enter. Then we had a value ID which was primary key. We want to see what is the importance of having a primary key as a constraint being implemented in a database. So we can select asterisk to see the values that were already there from customer. Then I put a semicolon. It was empty, sorry, that we deleted all the values. Then I can select the other values. We can describe let me describe the other table that we created. Implementing the constraint. I think it was student. Yeah, let's describe a student. We see what will happen. Describe department. We describe administrator, sorry, administrator, semicolon, we press enter. Yeah, then we select asterisk from administrator, semicolon. We see now you've from our data types, from our constraints, we have set ID to be a primary key. I want to insert a value that have the same ID, and we see what we'll have. So we insert into administrator. What are we inserting? We're inserting values. And which are those values? The first one is the name. So here we can have name by search name. Then we contact. Then on ID, I want to insert the same value, the ID as from Taichikos, 323232. We see what we'll have when we close the bracket. Now we expect that is going to give us an error because of duplicate work. So you can see from an error here, we have duplicate entry of 32 for key, which is primary key. So when I say that the primary key uniquely identifies the data in a table, it also does not permit you to use duplicate, and it is always good to use the primary key or another constraint called unique constraint to in our values, especially when we are dealing with the data that we expect to be different. For instance, the ID, because I don't think there are people who share IDs, the contact also. So it's always good to do so. So I feel like for today's lesson, I would just repeat on what we have covered today. Then we'll continue from there. We have covered on how to create a database by using the create database statement, on the first to how to show the databases and how to output the values using the asterisks and specific values. We have as well looked at how to update the values, how to delete the values, and I hope that class would be beneficial to you. But it's good to say that you need to have the basic theory so that as you look at the practical part of it, you'll have the basic theory, which will help you to capture and to understand the practical part of it. So thank you for following this class. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.